Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. On this week's episode, we bring you Judith, the Scourge Diva, with a $100 budget. All prices in this video are sponsored by TCG Player. If you use the link in the description below to buy singles, accessories, or the deck in this video, it'll help support our channel and help us create future content. If you're new to our channel and want to continue seeing budget commander content, please take a minute to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification icon, and it will notify you of any episodes that we create in the future. Judith, the Scourge Diva, is 1, a black and a red for a legendary creature, human shaman. She says, other creatures you control get +1/+0, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Judith the Scourge Diva deals 1 damage to any target. So with Judith, we're going to play an Aristocrat strategy. We do have a couple ways of giving Judith Death Touch in this deck, which is going to mean that she can kill creatures with her ability. And we have a lot of creatures in the deck that are going to drain your opponents when creatures die as a backup plan to Judith's ability. And then there's a lot of creature recursion in this deck. We went with a lot of creatures that we can get back from the graveyard easily, so we can keep reusing Judith and our other creatures' abilities of draining our opponents. The strengths of this deck is that it's very resilient. Because we have so much recursion in this deck, we are going to be able to get back our creatures. And we do have a lot of removal in this deck. And we did include a 2-card combo as an alternate win con to win the game. The weaknesses of this deck is any graveyard hate is going to be very detrimental to our strategy. Any player that's able to win the game within the first several turns is going to be tough to deal with them. And then any control players are also going to be hard to deal with if our commander keeps getting countered and removed. So let's start out by talking about a couple of the sack outlets that we have in the deck. I'm not going to go over every single card in this deck, but I am going to go over some of the ones that may be a little unique or are very important to the strategy of this deck. So first up, we have Ashnod's Altar. 3 colorless for an artifact. Sack a creature, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. This is one of the best sacrifice outlets in the deck because you're able to get mana when you sacrifice a creature. And then we have Falconwrath Aristocrat. 2 black-red for a vampire with flying and haste. Sack a creature, Falconwrath Aristocrat gains indestructible until end of turn. If the creature sacrificed this way was a human, put a +1/+1 counter on Falconwrath Aristocrat. And then we have Yahenni Undying Partisan. 2 and a black for a creature with haste. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Yahenni Undying Partisan. And then you can sacrifice another creature and Yahenni gains indestructible until end of turn. Let's talk about some of the creatures that are going to provide the majority of the damage that you're going to deal in this deck alongside Judith. And these are Vindictive Vampire, Blood Artist, Falconwrath Noble, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Each of these creatures has a similar ability that whenever another creature you control, and some of them say whenever any creature dies, that they're going to deal a damage or make a player lose a life. Since we are playing a Aristocrats and sacrifice style, we are going to be sacrificing a lot of the creatures in our deck, and having these on the battlefield is going to deal a lot of damage. There are a couple creatures in the deck that make each player sacrifice a creature, and those creatures are Plague Crafter, Fleshbag Marauder, and Merciless Executioner. When you play these, every player at the table has to sacrifice a creature. These work out really well against commanders that have hexproof, so Narset would be a good example of this, or that don't play very many creatures and they only play their commander. A Voltron commander would be another example of this. These creatures offer some removal, and they also work well with the Aristocrats' strategy of sacrificing creatures. One of the most important parts of this deck is having a draw engine when your creatures die. And we have 3 creatures in this deck that all have the same ability in Harvester of Souls, Midnight Reaper, and Grim Haruspex. And that ability is that whenever a non-token creature or a creature you control dies, you're going to be able to draw a card. And Harvester of Souls works when any non-token creature dies, including your opponent's creatures. And then Midnight Reaper and Grim Haruspex only work when another non-token creature you control dies. One thing to note with Midnight Reaper is it is not a May ability, so you have to be careful in drawing too many cards. You can lose a lot of life off of him. In this deck, we included several creatures that are able to return themselves either back to your hand or back to the battlefield after they die. And this is important because you want your creatures to die in order to get the damage off of Judith and your Aristocrats. So we have Gutterbones, Tenacious Dead, and Reassembling Skeleton. And Gutterbones, you can pay a 1 and a black to return it from your graveyard to your hand. And Reassembling Skeleton has the same ability except it returns to the battlefield. And then Tenacious Dead, whenever it dies, you can pay 1 and a black, and if you do, you get to return it to the battlefield tapped. We also included both of the Squee cards in this deck. They work out really well with Judith. And we have Squee Goblin Nabob, which is 2 and a red. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may return Squee Goblin Nabob from your graveyard to your hand. And then we also have Squee the Immortal, 1 red. You may cast Squee the Immortal from your graveyard or from exile. So these are both great creatures to keep returning back from your graveyard to your hand to get some additional value with Judith. Let's talk about some ways that we're able to bring some of our creatures back from the graveyard. And this is important in this deck as you're going to have a lot of creatures going to the graveyard. You do want ways to bring them back. So first up, we have No Rest for the Wicked. 1 and a black for an enchantment. And you can sacrifice No Rest for the Wicked. Return to your hand all creature cards that were put into your graveyard from play this turn. This is nice protection against a board wipe. You're able to just sacrifice this and return all those creatures back to your hand. And then we have Phyrexian Reclamation. 1 black mana for an enchantment. You can pay 1 and a black and 2 life to return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I want to call out a couple of cards from Battle Bond that are pretty cheap and I really like in this deck. And first up we have Last One Standing. 1 black-red for a sorcery. Choose a creature at random, then destroy the rest. So this is a 3 mana pseudo board wipe, and you don't care if your creatures die if you have Judith or any of your Aristocrats on the battlefield. You have a lot of ways to getting them back anyway. And then we have Thrilling Encore. 4 and a black for an instant. Put onto the battlefield, under your control, all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. If you or your opponents are able to board wipe and you have 5 mana up, you're able to get all those creature cards that were put into all graveyards onto the battlefield. Another way that we're able to get back our creatures after they die is with Garna the Bloodflame. She's 3 black-red for a legendary creature with flash. When Garna the Bloodflame enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn. And she also gives all your creatures haste, which is also nice to get in some damage after a board wipe. In this deck, you don't really have a lot of ways of drawing cards outside of your draw engines. So I did include Argyle's Bloodfast as another way of drawing some cards. And you do get a little bit of value out of it when it flips. So Argyle's Bloodfast is 1 and a black for a legendary enchantment. You can pay 1 and a black and 2 life to draw a card. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 5 or less life, you may transform Argyle's Bloodfast. It turns into Temple of the Alcazoa, and it's a legendary land. Tap it to add black to your mana pool, and then you can tap and sacrifice a creature. You gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. This isn't going to flip very often in our deck because we do have a lot of ways of gaining life, but you will have another sacrifice outlet if this does flip. Making tokens when creatures die is a very important strategy in this deck, and we do include 2 creatures in this deck that anytime a creature you control dies, they're going to create a Scion token. And Pawn of Ulamog is going to create 0/1 Eldrazi spawns, and Sifter of Skulls is going to create 1/1 Eldrazi Scion creature tokens. And this is really powerful as our creatures are going to be dying throughout the game, and we're able to create some more tokens that are going to help us ramp our mana and provide additional triggers on our Aristocrats and our Judith. Another card that has a similar effect is Open the Graves, and it's an enchantment that costs 3 black, and it says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Having ways to give your Judith Death Touch in this deck is going to give it some more range when dealing with opponents that have a creature-heavy theme. We did include Gorgon's Head in this deck. It's 1 colorless for an artifact equipment, and equipped creature has Death Touch, and you can equip it for 2. There are some other cards that you can include in this deck, but they were a little bit outside of our budget, and I would recommend Basilisk Collar at a little bit over $5. That's another card that you could put into this deck to give your Judith Death Touch. Let's talk about an alternate win con that we have in this deck, and it revolves around 2 cards. So first up, we have Pitiless Plunderer. 3 and a black for a creature. Whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You're going to get a lot of treasures off this guy because a lot of your creatures are going to die. And then we have Revel in Riches. 4 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. You can win the game with Revel in Riches pretty easily if you have both of these cards on the battlefield. Having the ability to get some treasures when your creatures die is pretty powerful. There is an alternate win con in this deck that's a 2-card combo that will give you infinite combat steps and attacks. And the 2-card combo is an interaction with Helm of the Host and Godo Bandit Warlord. So Helm of the Host is 4 colorless for legendary artifact equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature. except the token isn't legendary. If equipped creature is legendary, that token gains haste, and it does have equip cost of 5. And then we have Godo Bandit Warlord, 5 and a red for a legendary creature human barbarian. When Godo Bandit Warlord enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an equipment card and put it onto the battlefield. If you do, shuffle your library. Whenever Godo attacks for the first time each turn, untap it and all samurai you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So with Godo, you're able to search up your Helm of the Host, put it onto the battlefield, and then you can equip it to Godo and then attack. And with that attack trigger, you are going to get a copy of Godo that enters the battlefield. And since Helm of the Host makes it to where it's not legendary, you're going to have 2 copies of Godo Bandit Warlord. And then you get the additional combat phase with the Godo. And then when you swing the second time, the Helm of the Host is going to trigger and you're going to get an additional copy of Godo Bandit Warlord. And this is just going to keep going in an infinite loop. You're going to keep attacking and getting extra combat phases with the Godos. And every time another one is going to enter the battlefield. So you're able to get infinite combats with this and infinite Godos onto the battlefield. Another way that you can support our channel directly is by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There's a link down below in the description, and for as little as $1 per month, you'll have access to enter into all of our giveaways, including giveaways for decks that we create from deck techs, merch, and sponsored product. We also have tiers where you can help collaborate with us to create a deck, and we will create a video specifically for you and your deck and send you the deck. Check us out on Patreon. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch our video today. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, or Reddit. We'll see you next time.